Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast. Using my sportscasting background, I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players to gain more insight on what makes this team go. As the Detroit Lions enter a new gritty era, we'll look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. Welcome to another episode. In this episode, we're taking a look back at the Detroit Lions draft this past weekend, as well as discussing some of the wildly varied reactions to it as well.
All right, this is Corey Schlesinger, and you are listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
I'm joined today by James Cook, senior sports writer for the Traverse City Record Eagle. You can also hear him on the Get Around podcast. It drops on Mondays. Good to have you here, James.
Yeah, thank you. And this Monday, actually, we're going to have Jim Nagy on the podcast this week, who's the director of the Senior Bowl.
That's going to be awesome.
So he'll talk about the guys the Lions pick.
There you go, folks. Right there. There's another podcast to check out. That'll drop on Monday, the Get Around with James Cook, to get even more and varied insight to the NFL draft from this past weekend. James, let's get right to it. Thursday night, round one. Lions fans, they were not doing the same cartwheels they did in 2022 after we grabbed Aiden Hutchinson and Jamison Williams in the first round. So let's talk about each pick here. Let's start first with Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were surprised about this, including me. It wasn't until I saw some of the things that came out afterwards that I realized that if they wanted him, that's where they were going to have to go to take him, because the Patriots apparently wanted him at 14, the Jets wanted him at 15. As soon as the Lions made that pick at 12, the Patriots traded down from 14. So that certainly lends credence to that story that the Patriots kind of had their hearts set on him, and when he wasn't there, they moved out of that spot.
My initial reaction was shock. It was, okay, I think we're going Christian Gonzalez here. We've traded back. We can still get a great defensive back. I will say my favorite move was the fact that we traded back from 6 to 12. That was my hope this whole draft going in, is that we would trade back. We picked up an extra second round pick at the top of the second round with a couple other things in the background. And I like the fact that we got at the added value. When the Jahmyr Gibbs name came across the screen, I was a little bit surprised, a lot of it surprised. All mock drafts had said he was going to go in the early second round. And then some people recently thought he was going to creep up in the late first round even, but they were thinking 12, really? Here's the thing. Here's my thought process after I've heard a few people talk about it, is as much as I wanted Bijan Robinson, there's no doubt he was tier 1. Jahmyr Gibbs was tier 2. And then there's tier 3. So A, you had the different tiers, but B, Jahmyr Gibbs, General Manager Brad Holmes says, Jahmyr Gibbs fits the system the Lions want to run with the two-headed attack of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. So he's going to fit right into the system and be available to use out of the backfield, but then also as a wide receiver talent. And we talked about that before, that with the Jamison Williams suspension, the Lions might do some other things on offense we hadn't considered.
Yeah, he's somebody I could see being somebody they motion out into the slot quite a bit to create some mismatches there. He's a great runner. He gets to the outside. He's DeAndre Swift, but he can run inside, and he's a willing pass protector. Swift was never a very good pass protector. He was never very good at running between the tackles, not patient enough, and didn't seem to take well to coaching when they told him about these things. With Dan Campbell and his staff, that's not going to sit well. They must have really liked what they saw when they did the interviews with Jahmyr Gibbs, and saw somebody who maybe offered a little bit more in those areas than what DeAndre Swift was. Swift was certainly an explosive ball carrier on the outside, great receiver, but if he doesn't work on some of those other things, he's destined to just become a third down back. Whereas Gibbs can be a 3-down back if need be, but with David Montgomery, they don't even need him to be a 3-down back right now.
Well, and maybe to hopefully temper some of the disappointment of many Lions fans out there, they're reacting to information they had heard through mock drafts. And we now know that at least 2 other organizations, general managers, head coaches, were planning on taking Jahmyr Gibbs before he got to pick 18. So it shows we're not this organization out in left field making a pick that nobody was thinking of.
and you've seen it a lot over the last couple of years. So it's been one of the more impressive things I think about Brad Holmes is not only identifying talent, but he's able to scout other teams and their tendencies and what they want. And he seems to know when other teams want a player and is able to trade up and get ahead of those teams or stay ahead of them or trade back if there's not teams, that are going to be interested in this guy. And we saw them trade down what, 3 times at least. I mean, the trading up and down to me says that he really knows what other teams' draft boards are.
So as we were all recovering from the Jahmyr Gibbs pick, warming up to it, maybe thinking, okay, maybe this is something we can live with. Maybe this is something that's better than we realized initially. Then at 18, the Lions draft Jack Campbell, inside linebacker of Iowa. And one might argue this pick was met with even less fanfare than the Jahmyr Gibbs pick.
Yeah, and again, because he went earlier than people expected, not necessarily because he's not a perfect fit or a bad player for what the Lions want. I think it's people seeing the mock drafts and doing mock draft simulators and all those kind of things, and him being available later in the draft. Yeah, I mean, are those simulators and those mock drafts real? No, they're best guesses by people in the media like you and me. So they're not people who have gone to the combine, gone to these pro days, gone to workouts, done interviews with these players where they can ask them whatever they want.
So even though a lot of people might say, okay, I hear you there, James, and Jack Campbell seems to be a solid player, and by all accounts, he was the best linebacker in this draft. People are going to say, what about the value of taking a running back and a linebacker this early in the draft, the position value?
Yeah, and that does go against kind of what Brad Holmes has done in previous years because he's never drafted linebackers or running backs high. But I'm guessing that he's did that because there wasn't a need. When he was with the Rams, they had running backs and linebackers, so they didn't need those positions. So I think these are a little bit more of targeting guys that he thought were the biggest upgrades for this roster and going after those guys, no matter what it meant as far as getting criticism from Mel Kiper or Todd McShay or anybody for taking a guy a little too high. I mean, yeah, most of the mock drafts I did, I would get Jack Campbell for the Lions a lot in the second round.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head right there, right? Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell instantly add talent to this roster. Jack Campbell might be the most talented linebacker on our team now, and he's a rookie who just got drafted.
I think most definitely he is. He's the best linebacker on the team already.
So, with our 2 first-round picks, we have 2 guys who might be starters day one, which is what you want and you look for. But depending on the other positions, if we had drafted a defensive back or a defensive end, it's possible they would have been a rotational player, not a starting player. So you have more instant impact day one.
Yeah, for a team that has playoff aspirations this year, draft strategy changes as you get closer to being very good. Now they have a roster that's kind of littered with best player availables, and you have to fill in the other spots. You can do that in free agency, of course, but free agent players cost more, are older. These 2 picks to me, I was surprised where they took them. Yes, I'm going to guess Holmes probably was trying to trade out of 18 to do another trade back to take Campbell a little later in the first round, but couldn't find any takers.
Well, he actually also made an interesting nugget that at 18, he said when they were set to pick there, Jack Campbell was the highest rated player on their board, and it wasn't even close as to who was next. So you take that aspect, you compare that with the need at an inside linebacker. You and I have talked multiple times how the Lions have played so much nickel, and maybe they'll continue to roll with nickel, but now they have that option to run a traditional 4-3 or something else out there. Those things combined, General Manager Holmes said the Lions thought or could have considered trading back, but they didn't want to get too cute because sometimes when you get too cute, you lose what you really want.
And I see, like you said, Campbell, I think, is instantly the best linebacker the Lions can put out there. He can play on the outside. Like they could play him all over. Even if they were still doing the nickel only two linebackers thing, you could put him and Anzalone out there at the same time. And the Lions showed that they can drop front seven guys into zone last year pretty well and disguise them and pick up a lot of picks off of that. So I think it's a great fit. Last year they didn't even have really the option of playing a 4-3 because they didn't have a true inside linebacker. Anzalone's not a run stuffing linebacker. He's a pass coverage linebacker. And this year they've added a couple of other guys like that, like Jalen Reeves-Maybin, but he's another guy who's a coverage linebacker and not a thumper inside. It enables them to move some things around and do some different things with those linebacker core as well.
Well, after round one, a lot of negativity circling on social media, the national pundits, even Dan Orlovsky wasn't a fan of what we had done. But then something seemed to change on day two. With the Lions' first pick in the second round, our third pick overall, we took the second tight end in the draft. Dalton Kincaid went in the first round, but that left every other tight end on the board, and the Detroit Lions selected Sam Laporta out of Iowa. Now, this was part of the pick we got in that trade back from 6 to 12, giving us an early pick in the second round, because we know Laporta would not have been there when we were originally set to draft in the second round. There's a lot of PTSD with this pick. Now, this is a second round tight end. This is not a first round tight end or a top 10 tight end. But what are your thoughts on Sam Laporta out of Iowa and taking a tight end right here?
It gives them another weapon in that offense and another play toy for Ben Johnson. One of the things that kind of started going around in the back of my head is I'm wondering if Brad Holmes said, you know what, if we give you a tight end right here, will you promise to stay? We give you Jahmyr Gibbs, we give you Sam Laporta. Will you promise to stay a couple more years? Yeah, I don't know that that's true, obviously, but there's just a dream, I guess, in my head.
This also goes right along with that thought of, hey, maybe they're going to take a running back. Maybe they're going to take a tight end early, because everyone thought maybe they'd take a wide receiver. But when Jameson Williams comes back, you don't want to push somebody else back down to the bench. If you're drafting someone early, you want them in a centerpiece role. Gibbs and Laporta can offer that. Now, I know there's a learning curve with tight end in the NFL. We have to keep that in mind. But Laporta brings a high-level talent to that room.
Right, and he comes from a system in Iowa that has regularly produced very, very good tight ends in the NFL. Hawkinson being one of those, and guys who are NFL ready because they come from a system that features the tight end and uses the tight end in the ways that the pro team does. So I think those Iowa tight ends come in a little bit more ready. I would have argued that Kincaid and Laporta are both the number one tight end in the class. I mean, you could easily say that Laporta could have been the first tight end off the board and gone in the late first round. And I don't think that would have surprised a lot of people had he gone there. And he can catch, he can do everything. He's not a dominant blocker, but he's a good blocker.
Now, were you surprised that they took Laporta over Mayer, or not necessarily? You thought they were pretty equal?
I think that in the order, I think it was Kincaid and Porter, or Kincaid and Laporta at the top, and then a little small tier down to guys like Mayer, Musgrave, Washington. Had he been healthy, but there was some questions about some of his medicals coming up in team visits, which dropped him to I think the late third. I think that Kincaid and Laporta were the 1A tier, and then there was a 1B tier after that. Of those you saw, there was a big run of tight ends in the second round.
And it's always nice to be that team that starts the run, not the one who grabs at the end of the run.
Mm-hmm. So you're able to get the one that you want, the one that you think fits you the best, and the one that hopefully your offensive coordinator likes the best and can use his skill set.
Yeah, and you brought up Washington, right? That's a guy that I really liked, but there were some medical questions that came out that may have contributed to that. I love the guy the Lions grabbed. And then when we go to our next pick, I think this is the one pick that probably most, if not all, Lions fans are thrilled about. We saw the Lions trade up, and I thought in the second round was a great spot to get an offensive guard like O'Cyrus Torrence. But once they traded up, it instantly became obvious that if they're trading up, they're grabbing somebody that they think people are after. And Brian Branch out of Alabama had fallen further than expected. This is a great, talented guy, and the Detroit Lions got him out of Alabama at the 45th pick.
Yeah, I think that was a great pick for them. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but there's this one Packers super fan who kind of live streams the NFL draft, and he reacts to all the picks and everything like that. And he so wanted the Packers to take Brian Branch with that pick. He was like live on the air, and he's got this whole decked out basement with Packers stuff and everything. And he's like, "Oh, hey, Brian Branch is still available. We're on the clock and everything like that." And then he starts freaking out because he's like, "They traded with the Lions. They traded with the Lions." He's like, and then he starts freaking out that the Lions are going to take Branch, and then it happens, and then he just blows up. And he's like, "We let the team that beat the crap out of us last year get the best safety in the draft." And you just going on. It's hilarious. I think that was a lot of people's reaction outside of Detroit, and the people in Detroit were elated because I mean he is the best corner in the draft, comparable to C.J. Gardner Johnson. I think in a safety that you can move around. He can play the slot. He can play corner in a pinch. You can move him all around. He's the chess piece that you hear NFL people talk about, that you can just move around and play in different places, and they have a bunch of those now on this defense. I mean, Kirby Joseph can play both safety positions. Melifonwu, if he's healthy, can play corner and safety. If you need a big corner to match up against a big receiver, you can move him out to corner. They just have a whole bunch of pieces where they can mix and match that secondary to whatever the other team is doing.
Well, and I love the pick because, yes, the versatility. He's listed as a safety, but he can play nickelback, just like C.J. Gardner Johnson. The part you brought up about the Packers being the team that traded with us to get this, that just adds a little bit to it. I'm like, wait, did the Packers do that with us? And so I love this pick. Our defensive secondary went from being one of the worst last season. It's got to be a top 5 in the entire NFL.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if Mosley is healthy, if he gets back fairly early in the season, which it sounds like he will, and then Sutton, the guys that they have coming back, I mean, Jacobs, if Melifonwu is healthy, when he played his rookie season, he looked for a couple of games there like he was going to be a star.
Well, let me temper my expectations just a little bit. Top 5 is quite an accolade. Let's just say top 10. If we're top 10, that's a huge improvement, and I would be super satisfied, and that becomes the strength of our defense.
Yeah, over last year where they were incredibly, they were bottom 10, maybe bottom 5 in the league, the secondary. The defense as a whole, I think statistically was bottom 5. But, we saw that change over the last third of the season or so. Outside of the Carolina game, the Lions defense was actually pretty solid.
All right. Well, then the Lions had one more pick in the second round, but we saw them trade back twice and out of the second round completely, actually, into the third round. So that takes us to the third round. And with the 68th overall pick, the Detroit Lions selected quarterback Hendon Hooker out of Tennessee. What was your reaction to this?
I love this pick. Both you and I both were saying that the Lions needed to address the backup quarterback position. They needed to have somebody back there and to have somebody to develop as well. They had neither of those last season. They had Nate Sudfeld, who was purely a clip holder, somebody who had very, very limited NFL game tape, and what there wasn't great. For them to draft him here, I mean, there started to be talks, the week of the draft of him going in the first round of some team snagging him in the end of the first round, kind of like a Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers type move, where you have an established quarterback, but you have this talent there, and you take him because you can, and you prepare for the future. And the Lions did that with a third round pick, and were able to trade back a couple of times to do it and pick up some extra picks. That was just one of the great moves of the night, I think, for the Lions. I mean, they get a guy who's, yes, he's coming off a torn ACL, but he's already back to throwing and doing all that. He's supposed to be ready by the beginning of the season, but he's not going to need to play anyway. Barring an injury to Jared Goff, he's probably never going to see an NFL snap this year unless they have some blowouts.
I do think that most Lions fans are happy with this pick. Some were not thrilled with it, but as you mentioned, we said there's a need to draft a backup quarterback. Now, if you look, Hendon Hooker was the 5th quarterback taken in this draft. There were the top 3 in the first round, 1 in the second. He was the only one taken in the third round. His talent ceiling is considered much higher than everybody that was coming after him. So we got a guy with a lot of abilities, a lot of intangibles in the third round. Seems to be an incredible value to get him there.
And I think so. And he's got everything the Lions want. He's intelligent. He's got accuracy. He throws a great deep ball as well. He's poised in the pocket. He has the athleticism to run, but he doesn't a lot. He reads his progressions and stays with his progressions and reads his receivers, and then if need be, if the play breaks down, he can run. The poise in the pocket, and he's got the arm strength to make the throws. He checks off all the boxes. The Lions just got him because you know, he was the number 5 guy in this quarterback class and is coming off an injury.
My best friend is a Minnesota Vikings fan, and he was hoping the Vikings would get Hendon Hooker in the second round because Kirk Cousins, they need to find a successor to him at some point, and he loved Hendon Hooker. And when nobody took him in the second round and then he fell to us and we got him in the third, my friend wasn't too happy about that.
Yeah, and there's not a whole lot to not like about Hooker. I mean, he has the intangibles that you look for. The only negative really that I can find on him, aside from coming off the injury, and ACLs are not that big of a deal, anymore as they were 20 years ago when they were a career ender. Is the weird offense that Tennessee had. So he's going to have to develop or change, to an NFL offense, which is going to be an adjustment for him. But he's going to have a year or two to do that.
That's the thing. They don't have to have him come in and start right away. And other people will say, well, wait, the guy's like 25 years old. Again, this isn't a running back or even a defensive end. This is a quarterback. The lifespan of a quarterback's career can involve many more years. So that's not even really an issue at this point. Love the Hendon Hooker pick. Love the ability it gives the Lions to see if they can develop him and what can become. And that wasn't the only pick we made in the third round. We traded some of those other things. You talked about it. Brad Holmes was, I saw someone else write this, a chess master moving all over the draft. And he used some of that extra ammunition to move up. And with the 96 overall pick, filled the biggest need on the roster. Now, to what degree, we don't know yet, but he took a player and Broderick Martin out of Western Kentucky at a defensive tackle position. What do you make of this?
He's a big run stuffing defensive tackle. Maybe the best, just one of the best pure run stopping defensive tackle. He's like Maisie Smith from Michigan. But you think the Lions got him at the very end of the third round instead of Smith went late first.
Yes, he did.
They're very comparable. I mean, obviously he played at a little bit smaller school. We saw the Lions years ago with a guy named Sammy Lee Hill pick a small school huge defensive tackle who came in and played really well for the Lions for years. I see that as along this. I mean, I don't think that there'll be an adjustment period for him, and he'll come in and play right away, at a minimum as a rotational guy. Because for a nose tackle, there's not a whole lot of playbook study for a nose tackle. It's like stand there and take up 2 blockers and find the running back.
Yeah, there's not too many schemes you got to worry about. There's only so many spots you can move when you're right in the center of the field, right next to the football.
Yeah, you can see the football, you can see when it's snapped, all that stuff. So it's one of the positions where I think you can kind of slide right in to an extent, and I think he has the pedigree to be able to do that, and that fills a need.
Awesome. So that left the Lions with only 2 more draft picks in the draft, the 5th round and the 7th round. In the 5th, they went offensive tackle with Kobe Strasdell from William and Mary. And in the 7th round, they took wide receiver Antoine Green out of UNC. And you can't help with that last pick wonder if Dre Bly had some influence on that decision, considering he just came from working at UNC.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And he's supposed to be a deep threat. So he gives you maybe for those first 6 games what they're missing in Jameson Williams. So he could be a factor early on. He's a big receiver that has good speed and can get downfield. And that's primarily been his role at North Carolina, not necessarily a route runner like an Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then the guy from William and Mary looks like a developmental guard, probably playing guard rather than tackle. He played in college. He was very durable in college, very good in pass protection and a good run blocker as well, and has the size and everything that you look for in a guard. So I think that's that developmental pick to sit there for a year behind Graham Glasgow and then be, maybe a potential rotational guy or starting guard even next year if they let Vaitai go, depending on how things work out, obviously.
And then let's move on to the last part, which is post-draft, right? There's always that mad scramble to sign the undrafted free agents out there. You know, one of the wide receivers I really was hoping the Lions would take a look at was Dante Demas out of Maryland. He did not get drafted. Actually, the Baltimore Ravens signed him to an undrafted free agent contract. But a couple of the guys the Lions did take a look at, they signed about a dozen or so pretty quickly. The two that stick out to me are probably the ones that stick out to you. They got the signing bonuses. Mohamed Ibrahim, running back out of Minnesota, being Big Ten country here. We've seen this guy play. He got a signing bonus. And then you've got Chase Cota, the wide receiver out of Oregon, another signing bonus. If you're getting a signing bonus, that means they like your chances of potentially making the squad. No guarantees, of course, but what do you make of these two players? And is there anybody else that stands out to you?
Yeah, I think both of those two have a solid chance of making the team. Actually, I'm pretty sure that Ibrahim is almost a lock to make the team at this point. But barring injuries or something crazy, there's your goal line back, is what I'm seeing. There's your goal line short yardage back. He's a big receiver at like 220, I think, and just a power runner. So when you give him the ball, he's not going to do a whole lot special other than go forward. And he's got the work ethic, he's got the determination, all the stuff that the Lions have been seeking in players and knocking players off of their draft board because they didn't have that. Yeah, Chase Cota is another, that wide receiver, I think, is somebody who can come in and fight for a spot with Cephas gone now. He can fight for a spot there. And then Brandon Joseph, the safety from Notre Dame, could be a guy who could stick around if the Lions keep, like another fourth or fifth safety this season. I could see him being somebody who could play special teams as well and be a contributor there. And then the quarterback from Kansas State, Adrian Martinez, would be somebody who I believe will stick as the third quarterback or practice squad quarterback.
So you see Nate Sudfeld potentially not being one of the numbers at the start of the regular season?
Potentially, yes. It depends on how quickly Hooker recovers from his injury and if he is able to go at the beginning of the season. Otherwise, they might be a little more cautious and hang on to Sudfeld. But if Hooker comes in and is ready to go and all that, I could totally see them going with Martinez. One being much, much cheaper as a quarterback and also having upside. He's got physical tools there. He's a big quarterback. He can run. There could be all kinds of gimmicky things that you could do with him too. He could end up being a Taysom Hill type player.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential and possibilities there for sure. So as we wrap things up here, the grade on the Lions draft is not that high. I'm like, grades, what do you care about these grades for? Because the grades don't do the work on the field. You won't really know the grade until 3 to 5 years from now. I look at the talent the Lions have added. I'm pretty stoked about it. I think we added a lot of great pieces. Are there any final takeaways you have?
Yeah, I think the grades from the media they're something that are nice to talk about, but at the end of the day, you don't put a whole lot of stock into them. Matt Millen got great grades every year because it seemed like he was drafting off of everybody's mock draft. So I don't really buy it. I saw one NFL.com writer who graded the Lions as having the worst draft this year of anyone. And it was solely based on the first two picks being taken higher than he thought they should have. But he never said a negative thing about those two picks. And that was a C. He graded everybody on an A to F scale. And he gave the Lions a C+. And that was the worst grade that he gave everybody. And I'm like, that's not how a scale works. You know that as a teacher.
Yes, I do. And I also know I've heard enough things from the national media at times to realize they only understand some surface level stuff about the Detroit Lions football team. So I often take what they say with a grain of salt because they didn't dive deep into the stuff and they don't know the intrinsic details.
Just have a grain of Saltesiac.
A grain of Saltesiac. I like that.
That's what you're going to call the podcast.
James, thank you so much for joining the show today and discussing all about the Lions draft.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thank you.
And folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Please subscribe to Not the Same Old Lions podcast to get alerts about new episodes. Also follow the show on Twitter at Matt Saltesiak. Check us out on YouTube as well. And until next time, stay gritty, my friends.